I'm back on Mondays. Jason Priester, Clemson Insider. Glad to be back on a Monday. Kind of been out of sorts for about a month now. I've said it before. I'm a creature of habit. And, when that habit gets upset or interrupted or whatever you want to call it, I get a little out of sorts and my days start running together and stuff. And I'm glad to be back on Mondays, although it does feel like we just kind of did this the other day. And I guess technically we did since we've been doing it on Wednesdays, but back at it again tonight nonetheless. We can take it anywhere you want to go. We got, for me, football's starting next Tuesday. We got Dabo Swinney's big media event there in Clemson next Tuesday, bright and early Tuesday morning. We'll hear from every assistant coach, Dabo Swinney too, just like we do every year. And then that'll kind of carry over into the ACC kickoff, which is right after that. I'm going to be off that week. Go ahead and tell you right now, there will be no show that Monday night of the ACC kickoff. That week, I'll be out of town, taking a vacation, but we'll be here every other Monday. Outside of that one, I get the feeling, though, that most people probably want to talk about recruiting. As Sarian says here, fans are in a panic again about recruiting. And I understand it, man. It feels like there's been a lot of misses lately. And you get your first 2026 commitment over the weekend. That kind of eases the sting of some of those, but it definitely doesn't erase it. It's just, I understand the frustration, especially if you look at the first two big official visit weekends. Clemson had a pretty good success rate there. I don't have the numbers right in front of me or anything, but the hit rate was pretty impressive. Not so much this year. You've only hit on two of the guys that were there. Most of them have committed elsewhere. There are really a couple of other targets out there still undecided, Jordan Young being one off the top of my head. But most of them have decided to go elsewhere. And it just, there's a different feel coming out of this June as opposed to last June before last. And I understand the frustration. Although I personally, I think the optics are bad. Make no mistake, because you keep seeing, all these stories. Clemson target commits elsewhere. Clemson target headed to the Big Ten. Clemson misses on this target. Clemson target headed to the Big Ten. Whatever it might be. And there's a handful of those guys in there you absolutely would have loved to have, but I don't think it's quite as bad as being made out. It's definitely not as bad along the offensive line as it was a year ago. You went into June of 2023 with no commitments. You invite 6 to the big official visit weekend, hoping to land, 3, 4 of those guys, whatever it was, and you only get one, and then you struggle to land guys the rest of the way, and you have to, kind of run around and backfill, there at the end of the class. This time's a little different. You had 2 going in. You picked up a 3rd coming right out of that thing. So I think the offensive line recruiting is in a little bit better shape than, maybe optics would suggest. Obviously, you'd have loved to, and I think, obviously David Sanders is the guy atop of everybody's list, but me, the more realistic option was Hardy Watts. Anybody that knows me knows that I have not held out any hope for Clemson landed David Sanders going back, pretty much forever. And that kind of bore out yesterday when Clemson didn't even make the finalists, and I understand why they didn't make it. I've seen a bunch of comments about how can Nebraska, who hadn't been relevant in, decades, be a finalist and Clemson not, because they play in the NIL game. Clemson's not. You can use Nebraska as a way to get more leverage over some of these other schools. You can't use Clemson that way because they're not doing these type of recruitments. That you can't use Clemson in the same kind of way you can use in Nebraska, as a form of some leverage. Nebraska's kind of won a couple of these battles in this class. Clemson doesn't even get into them. So I understand, I understand how Clemson's not on that list and Nebraska is. But anyways, to me, Hardy Watts is the guy you'd really, love to have had. And I think that's the way the staff felt about it. And I think they were probably pretty close to landing him. I think he just went with the program that's known for putting dudes into the league at his position. And Clemson just ain't that right now. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened with Max Buchanan had he chose to stick with his August, commitment date rather than moving that thing up, to a couple of weeks ago and deciding to jump on board with Miami. I kind of understand Mal Waldrop. He's got the connection to Clemson. He's got more connections there, with Alabama. And Mario Nash is a guy you probably, you were probably always playing catch up with. So, I mean, it just kind of, there's different reasons for different guys. And again, I just think it's it's probably looks a little worse than it actually is. Probably feels a little bit worse than it actually is. Clemson went into the summer. I think their class was ranked firmly entrenched inside the top 5 at least 2 of the recruiting services. Might have been 3, I can't remember, but definitely 2 of them. And you come out and you're kind of just barely holding on to a top 10 spot. Where that's kind of where Clemson's kind of recruited at throughout Dabo's tenure. Only twice have they finished inside the top 5. Twice. And I don't, I think they've played some of their best ball and developed some of their best talent with classes that finish between, somewhere between 7 and 13. That's kind of where their bread's been buttered. And that's probably where they'll probably fall in that category again this year, probably on the lower end. They could still end up in the top 10, depending on how many more they take. A lot of times there's a big premium placed on quantity. I'm a guy that likes to look at that average star rating more so than the actual class rank. That's a little bit better of a gauge because it doesn't really factor in, quantity when you got some schools taking 25, 26, 27, and you're taking 18, 19. That's a big difference, and it's weighed heavily in those recruiting rankings. But all that to say, I think it's a little worse. I mean, I think it's not quite as bad as it looks. It's probably not quite as bad as it's being made out to be. Make no mistake, though, there's some guys in there you'd have loved to have had. And Hardy Watts is one. Cortez Mills is one. To me, those are really the top 2 guys. Obviously, again, you'd want David Sanders. I just don't think that was recruitment Clemson was ever going to win. And I see, these comments like this right here, you're losing to places like Rutgers, Wisconsin, Ole Miss, OU, places Dabo didn't used to lose to. Clemson would have lost head-to-head battles with Wisconsin for offensive linemen plenty of times, even in the old era. Clemson's that's kind of the final hump you got to get over, is being able to consistently land those big-time offensive linemen. They've not consistently been able to do it, period, under Dabo. Kind of is what it is. But this is a new era. You're going to lose out to schools that you used to not lose to. Guess what? So is Michigan, so is Alabama, so is Ohio State. It's not just a Clemson thing. They're all going to lose out. When you got a school like Rutgers who's got they've had some success with what they're doing NIL-wise. You start it levels the playing field, man. And there's guys, they're going to take the money, the better offer. A lot of them are, and it's hard to argue against that. Especially when Clemson doesn't get into the bidding wars, and there's this misconception that freshmen coming in doesn't have any NIL opportunities at Clemson. That's just a totally big misconception. They absolutely do. Dabo just doesn't get into. He's not going to be drawn into those bidding wars, which is exactly what David Sanders' recruitment's turned into. But you're going to see more of those battles. You got Ole Miss listed in there. They are they are absolutely playing the NIL game. But you also see Ole Miss as one of those schools that have tons of guys leave after every season. You know, what Dabo's trying to sell is something a little more stable, you know, a little bit more of what college is supposed to be about. But there's going to be a lot of guys that, you know, that's not going to resonate as much with as it used to in the past. Although I still do believe there are plenty enough out there that it will still resonate with, especially once we start getting into the revenue sharing. That's going to even things up dramatically, in my opinion. Last 2 pair of shades. Oh, no hints, man. 2 pair of shades still out there. No hints. That's all I'll say. Everyone jumping on QB recruits. True analysis on the 2. Analysis on the 2 court. I guess you're asking me about Tate. I'm not sure. Tate Reynolds will flat out tell you he's extremely raw. He's got a lot of developing still to do. Talked to him. I had a good conversation with him on the day before he went public over the weekend. That's twice I've talked to him now for a while on the phone, and he's very transparent, man. I really like that kid. I think he's a really good fit at Clemson. I know people are worried about him never getting to campus for baseball. I don't even think that's in it. I don't think that's in his future plans at all. He's his exact words were me. He's dead set on playing college football. He'd like to play both, at least for a year. He knows how hard it'll be to play quarterback and baseball at the collegiate level. Don't know if he could do it for more than a year. He'd like to give it a shot, but again, he'd like to at least play for a year. But yeah, he's raw, and he'll be the first one to tell you that. He flat out told me that he's a lot more raw than some of these other quarterbacks are. But when you watch him, like at camp last month, the guy's got all the physical tools, man. He's got a cannon for an arm. He is big. He is strong. He's quick. He's got some speed. He's got some mobility. I think he's everything Garrett Riley wants in a quarterback. I think he's listed at 215 at one of the recruiting sites, or more than one of them. I think he's probably weighs heavier than that already. I've said it several times. It doesn't look like he's missed a leg day in the gym in years. His thighs are like tree trunks. And that's the guy Garrett Riley wanted. I know Brady Hart announced his offer first, but Tate was actually the first one to get an offer, and that's the guy that Garrett wanted. As far as analysis on him, I don't have a whole lot of analysis to give you other than that. He's really only been playing quarterback at the high school level for 1 year. He's only been playing football for about 2 years. So he's got a ton of room to grow. And in their eyes, fortunately, they don't see him as a guy that they're going to need to come in and start his first year. I think Garrett Riley likes a lot of those he sees a lot of those same qualities in Blake Hebert. If you're asking me true analysis on those two, if you're asking me about Hebert being one of the two, I'm not sure what you're talking about there, but I'd say the same thing about him. There's not a lot of film to go on. He got hurt last year. He didn't play. He got hurt in his very first game, didn't play the rest of the season. So there's really no junior film to go off of, but the same thing as Tate. He's got all the physical tools. I'm not quite sure. I don't think he's as raw as Tate is, but he doesn't play against the best competition up there where he lives. He did move, and he's playing at a different school this year to kind of, play against a little bit better competition. But when you live up there in Connecticut, you're not going to be playing what you play against in Georgia or Florida or Texas or, heck, even at some levels in South Carolina. So it's hard to answer those questions at this point, man. I'm hoping Blake Hebert can stay healthy for his senior season and we get some more film to watch, but and you get a better idea of exactly how much more developing he's got to do, because I don't know if he's on the same level as Vizina was, who I always maintained was going to need at least a year, maybe 2, and it's turning out that he might need 2. You just hope that they have him ready to roll by the time they need him to start. Fortunately, you don't need him to start right now. But there ain't a whole lot of to analyze out there on Tate Reynolds right now. He's a hell of a baseball player, I'll tell you that. With virtually every recruit who attended the official visit committing elsewhere, is this fan panic button or just missing on the last few pieces of the 2025 class? It's missing on a few of them, sure, absolutely, 100%. Again, I mean, I think Watts and I don't even, when I start talking about these guys, I don't even include Sanders anymore because he's a guy I never thought Clemson had much of a realistic shot with. So to me, it's kind of Watts and Mills at the top of the list, and you'd have loved to have had Zay Thomas too. I don't even think Clemson's going to look for another cornerback. I think they're perfectly content with taking just Grayson Littleton, but they like Zay Thomas so much they would have taken him too. That's another one you were always kind of playing catch up on, and it's probably one you were never going to win. He's just, it was always Florida State. He's going to be the first member of the Seminole tribe to ever play there. But, so yeah, you definitely missed on a few of them. Again, I'd have loved to see if they could have got Max Buchanan to hold off and wait until, later in the summer to announce exactly, or if that would have played out different, but who knows, it might not have. But I also think there's still more than 5 months between now and December. I think if you could land Dylan Alford, if it's me, I'm 100% thrilled with that. I like Dylan Alford pretty much as I like Cortez Mills. Perfect world, you land both those guys, and they'd have taken both. But I think they'll probably, if they can land Alford, that'll probably be it. If you compare Logan Anderson to Kamar Archie, some of the things I've seen since Kamar committed to Rutgers, and Kamar Archie, let me say this again off the bat, one of the most humble kids I've ever spoken to, one of the best interviews I've ever done. But some of the things that I've seen since he committed makes me think Clemson might have maybe missed on a headache here. A couple of tweets from his daddy that have intimated that, his commitment don't really mean nothing until the ink's dry. He could go through his senior season and increase his worth and his, basically, pretty much making it sound like his kid's for sale. That's kind of how I took it. So I think he might have missed out on a headache there. And I watched Logan Anderson work out at camp. That guy killed it, man. Almost every camp he went to over the summer, and I can't remember all of them, but that school wanted him. Most of them would have taken him. He was so good that morning session, they told him don't even bother working out in the afternoon session. They wanted him to come in the facility and meet with the staff, and that's when he got his offer and stuff. So if you get him, it might have been, you might end up being better off. He might need a little bit more developing than Kamar Archie did, but both those guys still got another year of high school. I think Logan Anderson's a guy that's severely underrated by the recruiting services, and it's probably got a lot to do with him living, I forget where he lives off the top of my head, but matter of fact, where does he live? Alabama. I think he plays at a little school in Alabama, and sometimes you can fly under the radar there, but it'll be interesting to see who or if they decide to. I imagine they'll try to find a fourth offensive lineman to add to the class, but I think the three you got are three really good ones. So I mean that's a step heading in the right direction, in my opinion. Do I think Clemson has a chance to join the Big Ten without AAU accreditation? Absolutely, 100%. I do indeed. Now, I'm not saying that's where they'll end up, but I do think – I don't think that let's just say this. I think there will be schools that aren't AAU accredited that end up in the Big Ten. Twitter has turned into total freak out. They're yelling about Dabo this and that, needs to pay recruits. Of course, there are folks who aren't even paying $500,000 themselves. I understand it's when you're on the outside looking in, it's easy to say, hey, man, we need to be playing this game. I don't know that Clemson can afford to play the game based on some of the things that I've heard. And maybe that's not the right way to phrase it. You probably could afford to play the game, but then you probably couldn't afford to pay the players that have been loyal to you and have performed for you and probably deserve that money more than a high school kid or a kid coming out of high school. There's a reason why Clemson hasn't lost but one or two starters, to the portal. And that happened for the first time after last year. I've been told that the kid from right down the road from me that's on the roster now got offered a lot of money to leave after last season, and he chose not to. But, let's say Clemson could afford to do all this stuff. Not that they're rolling in money. Let's say they got just enough to be able to play the game for the high school recruits, but not enough to satisfy everybody. Say you decide to give David Sanders 6 figures to come to Clemson. Then you're going to have to give it to every other offensive lineman on your roster or risk losing them. And I don't know that they can afford to do that, which means you'd probably be losing, more than one offensive lineman after the season ended. I just think you got to pick a line in the sand and decide how you're going to approach it. I do think once this house settlement gets done, and if it's a $22 million cap that the schools can use out of the television revenue, I think that's going to help Clemson tremendously. It's not going to solve all the issues because the collectives aren't going away. But if you've got the money to offer all the kids, the guys on your roster and the guys coming out of high school, that's going to go a long ways towards, kind of pulling Clemson back to kind of even with some of their counterparts. Then you can go back to, selling culture and all that stuff to the guys you deem, or the guys that you think fit what you're selling. And that could start as early as next year. Yeah, Bryce Davis is still a guy that's not committed yet. I don't, me personally, I don't particularly have a really great feeling about Clemson landing him, but I can't say for sure one way or the other. I would probably lean Georgia. I do think Clemson probably did enough to give him some pause and have him considering things. Wouldn't outright shock me if he ended up in this class, but I'd be a little bit surprised. And if they miss on him, I think they're probably done at defensive end. He's another one of those guys that they'll take because they think he's that good. But if they miss on him, they'll probably be happy with what they got in Wofford and Campbell. No one hanging around for development. They follow money. We getting outbid by lower tier teams. I would just say, look at the number of players leaving Clemson, man. They're very small. You've had 2 starters leave. Probably, and I would argue that Bo Collins snaps were going to go down significantly this year. He and Makuba are the only 2 starters that have left to this point. They've done a really remarkable job of keeping that roster intact, and all those guys are hanging around for development. So I don't know what you mean by no one's hanging around for development. They're not all out following money. I know of several players on that roster who had better deal. Who there were deals out there better than what they were getting from Clemson, and they chose to stay for the development. And that was this offseason. One of them from right down the road from me. So you just got to be. It does make your evaluations that much more important, man. You got to know who you're recruiting. You got to identify the guys that are, strictly out chasing money. And if you just do decide to go in on all those guys, who's to say they won't be right back doing the same thing after their first year in the program? They're right back out there trying to create another bidding war, seeing which school will give them the better deal, and then they're right in the portal after they've been with you for a year. It's a very slippery slope right now, and I just, I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer, but I kind of see the logic behind the way Dabo approaches it, especially when you don't have this unlimited amount of money to work with. So with lacrosse, definitely getting some quality players. You're going to have to reach out to John Blau over there at the Post and Courier for all your insight on lacrosse. Most I can tell you is Clemson flipped a big recruit from Syracuse. They've got a couple of big recruits in this signing class. Past that, I am not the guy to ask about that. John Blau matter of fact, he just wrote, a good story about, I think the girl, I don't know which one it was, but one of those members of this signing class and how Dabo helped recruit her and stuff. It's worth a look. John Blau, Blau, JONBLAU, man. He's worth a follow on Twitter. I think he just put that story out yesterday. That's your lacrosse guy. Tell him I sent you. How much do you think or know that Dabo discusses NIL potential during recruiting, like sharing a range of NIL contracts or payments? I think they have. I think they go into pretty good detail on it, based on some conversations that I've had with, some guys that have been there for the big official visit weekend and some parents I've talked to. It's like he says, it's just not something that they don't use it to sell the program on. I've had one parent or one family member tell me that the person they talked to while they were there, I guess it was kind of after the big presentation or whatever, that they had some more questions, and the staffer they were talking to sat there for an extra 90 minutes and went over things with them. As far as the specifics, I know everybody wants numbers. They're just not out there. Especially when you start talking about how much this player is getting, how much that player is getting. I will say this. I heard that Clemson's highest paid player, I don't know about in 2023, but in 2022, Clemson's highest paid football player made over 7 figures. Now, did all that money come from the collective? Obviously not. That was total NIL deals in total. And I would be willing, to bet almost anything the majority of that money came from outside deals. But it does show you that the opportunities are there. There are opportunities in Clemson to make money if you have success on the field. If O-line is the hardest position to evaluate, why would teams pay big NIL for that position? Also, wouldn't that upset the locker room? I don't think that many teams are paying a whole lot of offensive linemen big money NIL deals coming out of high school. I'm not saying there aren't any, but I think it's a small handful. Guys like David Sanders, maybe. Even big NIL deals, that term is subjective. What you describe as a big NIL deal, I might not describe as a big NIL deal. When I think of big money NIL deals, I'm thinking 7 figures. I don't know that any offensive lineman's commanding that. Not even Sanders. Maybe he gets that, maybe he doesn't. But he's probably the exception. But I'm not saying that they don't get anything. I just don't know that a ton of offensive linemen are getting these big money NIL deals coming out of high school. But they can probably get better deals at other places than they probably would at Clemson as freshmen. So some of them are going to take that. Some folks already saying Tate looks like Jalen Hurts. Seems way too early to make comparison. I see Eric Dungy when watching his film. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of player comp, so I don't know that I see anybody in him. I can see, but I guess I can see both those comparisons. There's nobody that jumps right out off the top of my head of somebody I could compare him to in my eyes. I don't even think I mentioned this earlier. When I talked to him the first time after he had worked out at camp, he had never even worked out with a personal quarterback coach. Not since not since he's been playing football the past couple of years. Since I've talked to him the last time, he has. I think he's fixed. I don't know if he's already started that up or he's fixing to start that up. I can't remember what he said exactly, but if he's not already done it, he's fixing to start doing it. I think he's already started. He's just very raw. Very raw. Got a lot of development still to do, but also still has 2 years of high school football to get that development done. So we taking experiments at QB don't sound good. I don't know what you expect them to do. And you call them experiments. I don't know that the coaching staff see those guys that way. That's your opinion. You're not gonna get the Deshaun Watsons and the Trevor Lawrences right now in this era. They just can't afford to do it. It's not gonna happen. So you got to go out and find the guy that you think you fits your offense and that you think you can have ready by the time he needs to be ready and has got the skill set that you deem necessary to run your offense at a high level. And so far, I think Garrett Riley's done a hell of a job with the quarterbacks he's worked with. Just it kind of is what it is. And I don't know how many of those were high 4-star, 5-star kids. I don't know that I would call Blake Hebert an experiment. I guess I can understand why you say that about Tate Reynolds since he's only been playing a couple of years. But, that's your word, not mine. I don't think the staff would frame it that way either. So I'm probably going to get shamed for this, but I'm going to say it. We aren't going to land big shots anymore. Many say stars don't matter, but I beg to differ. We need to actually favor this NIL and Porter more. We are not going to see the college football playoff for the foreseeable future. If we join the SEC or Big Ten, we have to wake up. See, again, man, you keep saying we got to do this portal stuff and NIL stuff. Do you know for certain they've got the money to do that? Do you know for certain that they've got the money to go out and win these bidding wars that you're asking them to get into while also at the same time being able to retain the guys on staff that are currently on the roster? It's easy to say those things, man, and I understand it on the surface, but once you start digging deeper into it, I don't know that they do. I don't think Clemson's NIL efforts. I'm not saying that they don't have any money, but I guarantee I would be willing to bet they've not been as successful as most people think they have, based on some of the things I've heard. So you have to kind of decide which way you're going to approach it because you can't have it both ways. And I understand fans' frustration with Dabo's stance on the portal and reluctance to bring guys in from the portal. And I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about straight, bidding wars on high school kids coming straight out of high school. Now, as far as the portal stuff, I do think there's some crossover here. Do you want to pay an offensive lineman who you don't even think can come in and start for you this year, $400,000, $300,000, whatever it is that they're asking for, when you don't even got one on your roster making that right now? That'll run every guy in your room out of there. Then you'd have to replace them all in the next recruiting class, and then you wouldn't be able to pay the ones that you definitely wouldn't be able to go out and replace them all in the portal because you wouldn't be able to afford it. I just don't think most fans understand it. Clemson can't go out and win all these wars. I do think it's fixing to let up some. When this house settlement gets done, and Clemson is 100% going to be one of the schools that, opt into the $22 million or whatever it ends up being salary cap. So they will have a lot more money to work with on a year-to-year basis, and it's going to alleviate some of this, man. I wouldn't write them all the way off just yet. The days of playing for a team because you connected with the team is over. It's now all about how much you offer. For a lot of guys, yeah, but it ain't like that with all of them. If it was, Clemson doesn't get Peter Woods. They don't get Sammy Brown. They probably don't get TJ Parker. I could go on and on. There's several guys on the roster they don't keep this year if those guys looked at it that way. Rutgers took a player for us. If we can't outbid Rutgers, then we are really doing something wrong. Clemson didn't outbid Rutgers on him. And his daddy's out there saying right now that he's still up for sale. Is that the guy you really want to make your point with? Because that's the guy I'm going to make my point with. Why are you going to promise that guy something and you don't even know if he's going to be here in December to collect on it? Daddy's flat out tweeted out twice since his commitment that he's basically still up for sale. That kind of is what it is. And I've never talked to his daddy, but those tweets were very telling to me. Kamar seems like a stand-up dude. Wouldn't surprise me at all if he ended up staying with Rutgers the whole time. Depends on who's calling the shots in the background. But he wanted to stay home. He wanted to stay home. That was a big part of it too. Since Tate Reynolds has already decommitted once from another school, how confident are we he stays committed? I'm 100% confident. Right back to that. No, it was not DJ in 2022. I am 100% confident that I can't say 100%. Let's say 95% confident that Tate will stay committed throughout. I think he was not committed to another school to play football. He was committed to play baseball there. At one point, that's where he thought his future lied, was playing baseball. And, not so long ago, he didn't know he was going to have the opportunities that he started to get to play football at the next level. Once those started coming in, he had to kind of reevaluate. And I've seen a lot of people worried that he's going to get drafted and not ever make it to college. Not based on what he's told me in two different conversations. He's got every intention on coming to play. He says his future, he's dead set on playing football. That's where he thinks his future lies now, not baseball. But, the one thing I will say, if Garrett Riley leaves for some reason before Tate gets here, maybe maybe that opens the door a little bit. I'm not saying it will. I'm just saying it's not something you can overlook. But, as we sit here today, man, I wouldn't worry about Tate too much. Riley sees talent, knows what he likes. Guys working for media sites. Yeah, there's not been a whole lot to evaluate Tate on, and again, he's still pretty raw. He's really only played his sophomore season. How many of those guys at On 3 or 24/7 went out and actually watched him play a game last year? Probably none. If there were any, there was not many. Obviously, I get some of them probably saw him work out on the camp circuit this summer. I know one of the 24/7 guys did because I saw him there. But when you're watching a guy work out at camp, it's a little bit different watching him playing in the game. And again, he's got 2 more years. Somebody else is asking what was the appeal in Tate Reynolds. You have to ask Garrett Riley, man. He's this handpicked guy. He sees something in him that he likes. Again, I think we're getting too bogged down in the fact that the kid's not a 5-star going into his junior year when he's only been playing football for 2 years. You look at what Riley did with the quarterbacks he worked with there, at what was it, SMU and TCU. Pretty good success, man. I wouldn't write him off after 1 year at Clemson with Klubnik, who probably isn't the best fit for what he wants to do on offense anyways. I'd give him a little bit longer leash than that. $110 collective has life. Okie doke. At 200 pounds, Tate has a size. What I believe is he was very coached. He's probably closer to 215, 220 right now. I know he's listed at 200, 210 on the sites, but that guy is a physical specimen, man. He's 6'2", 6'3", and I don't think it's that he was just very coachable, although, I know that he was. He's got a cannon for an arm. He's pretty dang accurate with the football. He throws on the run really well. He does all the things, in a drill setting that they like. And again, Riley sees something in him that he really likes. Rutgers is in debt. Google it. It's really interesting how broke they are from joining the Big Ten. But that's a different pool of money, man. When you start talking about NIL, it comes straight through donations from the fan base. So if you can get a couple of donors, you go to a couple of donors and say, hey, man, this kid's asking for this kid's asking for this, what can we do? And Rutgers has a pretty sizable alumni base with some money in it. So if you find some donors, you just, hey, this guy's asking for this guy's asking for this guy's asking for this, what can we do? And you find some that say, okay, yeah, we can do this, we can do this. That's all it takes. You're not drawing from, television revenue or athletic department budgets. That's not where the money's coming from. It's not coming from endowments or anything like that. It's coming straight from fan donations. I don't think it's NIL just holding Clemson back. I think it was him hiring inexpensive in-house and seeing. Oh yeah, it's definitely not just the NIL stuff. It's definitely the 3 years of the offense taking big steps backward. Since the playoff run, that plays a big part in this. Clemson not having much of a track record of developing and putting offensive linemen into the league, that plays a big part in missing on some of these offensive linemen, particularly with a guy like Hardy Watts. It's not just one thing, man. It's a bunch of things, and I do think Dabo has done some things to kind of address the, let's say the inexperience on the offensive side of the ball on the coaching staff. With firing Austin and bringing in Luke and, bringing in Garrett Rice. So I do think he's done some things to address that. But I think one of the best things they could do this year is go out and prove that they are trending back in the right direction. Last year you had 2-3 lost seasons in a row, and then last year you come out the gate 4-4, man, and end up going 9-4. You lose, you don't hit 10 wins for the first time since 2010. Despite the 2-3 lost seasons 2 and 3 years ago, now you're talking about a 4 lost season, so it looks like you're even dropping a little further back. So yeah, I think all those things factor in. Aside from the NIL stuff, Sanders will go down as one of the biggest misses of the Dabo era. People will see it how they want to see it. I do not agree with that at all. I don't think you can miss on a guy you were never going to get. Comment just made sounds if you doubt Clemson can land a 5-star QB with the current system. Was I reading that right or wrong? I believe they can, but also believe they would take a huge portion of what they can offer multiple guys for the one. I think it is under this current system we're playing in right now. I think it would be. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's not going to be. I do not think Clemson lands Deshaun Watson under this current format. I have high doubts they land Trevor Lawrence. It just kind of is what it is. I do think this is probably going to start next year in 2025. Again, once you get that, you can start using television revenue to pay those guys, and you're not just solely having to use donations from fans. I think that's going to help Clemson tremendously. Tremendously. Does it fix all of the problems? No. Once they have that kind of money to work with, and I think Ohio State's already come out and said that they're gonna, kind of go by Title IX and how they dispense that money, because it's not all that $22 million doesn't just go to football. Each school can. I think they can choose to disperse it how they see fit. It's going to be how Title IX factors in is going to be something to keep an eye on, because I think somebody told me the other day if Clemson factored Title IX or went strictly by Title IX when deciding how to distribute that money, 62% of it would go to women's sports. 62%. Not sure you're going to see it play out that way, but there might be some Title IX mess get stirred up and all this stuff that's coming. But I do think when Clemson, and let's say they choose to put most of it in football, they won't have all $22 million of it, but I do think they're going to have a big chunk of it to spend on football, and I do think it's going to help. Is it going to solve all the problems? No, absolutely not. But it will make you – I've already been told by more than one recruit's family that Clemson offers competitive NIL deals. Again, they just don't get into bidding wars, and they choose to focus most of it on the players already on the roster. I've had somebody tell me you kind of got to earn it. But I do think when they get that injection of money and they're able to tap into that, it's going to help. Maybe you can go back to landing a big-time quarterback or two. We just have to see how it plays out. But under these wild, wild west rules right now, and I don't see it. It's maybe there's say you stay under this same format for another 5 years, which I don't think we're going to. Let's just hypothetically say you do. A couple of years from now, maybe there's a 5-star kid who doesn't really need the money. His family's got money and stuff, and he's just not interested in chasing money. And maybe that's one Clemson could win. I don't know. I think the chances reside somewhere between slim and none. But I do think once we get under the new format, when they can start, revenue sharing, I do think that's going to help tremendously. Then I think maybe you can go back to, competing for some of those guys. Do you think Tate can pull off being a full-time two-sport player? I think it's extremely difficult for a quarterback to do in this day and age. But we saw Kyler Murray do it at Oklahoma. Obviously, he's the exception. I think the better question is, let's say he develops into a really good quarterback, good enough that he could start as a sophomore. Would Dabo Swinney be willing to let him miss spring practice to play baseball if he's going to be your starting quarterback? To me, that's the better question. Wish I lived an hour away from the coast. Spend all your time coming here to upstate. I'd be a beach pond. Oh, you can have the beach, man. I have not been to the beach. We used to have a place there, and I'm trying to think when. I used to have a mobile home down there in Garden City, and we probably moved it out of there. It's probably been 10 years ago now. I've only been back to the beach one time since. I can't stand the ocean, man. And it seems like each year the crowds get bigger, and I never, even when we had a place there, I never went to Myrtle Beach. And we'd go over there for the weekends. I'd pretty much stay in the house all weekend. Maybe ride around the mobile home park on the golf cart or something, or ride down to the arcade or something. Never to the actual ocean. You can have that. Is Riley going to bring the air raid, or does Clemson not have the proper offensive weapons to run it? Riley's offense just has air raid tendencies in it. I wouldn't call it a true air raid. And yeah, I do think. Gotta be careful how I say this. I do think not having some of the right pieces in the right places kind of hampered a little bit of what he wanted to do on the offensive side of the ball last year. He kind of pretty much said that in one of his press conferences last year too, when asked why his offense didn't, resemble what it looked like at TCU. He pretty much said because we don't have the same, personnel. So go back to the, early part of the season, and a lot of the running plays Riley wants to call. He gets those. Offensive line, them big offensive linemen out there pulling, man. And you watch Clemson's, offensive linemen get out there and try to pull, particularly some of those guards. And they just seem a little bit slow. I don't know if they're the best fit for that kind of, run scheme. But and they ended up adjusting and going back to his own blocking scheme, which led to more success. Matter of fact, I think it was the Notre Dame game when they kind of made the switch. Yeah, but to answer your question, no, it's not going to be. It's not a true air raid. It's just an offense that's got some air raid tendencies. Have been drowning in the exposed from players about the 110 society today. Yep, I've seen them. I'm not a big fan of that. It just, I might be way off on this, man, but it just kind of, I'm not even gonna say it. But you'll see it what is it? Every couple of weeks, every 3 weeks, man. There'll be a day where a bunch of players, tweet out about, asking for donations to the 110 Society. I'll just say I think there's a better way to go about doing it. Why didn't Clemson look at Julian Lewis? Clemson looked at Julian Lewis. He was at camp for that, but it was very easy to see which direction his recruitment was going to take from a very, very early on. And that's why they never jumped in on that. Somebody asked me about Cade earlier. No, I can't find it now. When will we know about how our current players are progressing from their previous injuries? We'll hear from Dabo next Tuesday. Why the disrespect on Keith Adams? I've not mentioned Keith Adams. Definitely haven't disrespected him. I think he's kind of, he looks pretty locked into that backup running back role right now. It'll be interesting to see how Jay Haynes factors into that, if he can stay healthy, and if Ajamame can, pick it up quick enough to get into the rotation. Clemson and SSU trying to leave the ACC. Who do you think the ACC won't keep the most, Clemson or FSU? I think they'd probably prefer keeping both. I don't think they're going to keep either. I mean, if it comes to either or, I don't know who their preference would be. I'm sure they'd be glad to be able to hang on to either one they could, because both of them are the cash cows for this league over the past, Florida State had a stretch where they were the cash cow. Clemson had a stretch where they were the cash cow. Florida State's kind of coming back. Both of them draw big money, and a bunch of the teams in the bottom half of the league are kind of just piggybacking off the success that Clemson and Florida State and some other teams, have had financially for the conference. I don't find that question now. I think somebody asked me about Cade. Something about Cade. Now I can't remember what it was. There you go. How do you feel about Klubnik going in this year? Do you see any improvement in his decision making? I feel that he has got to make a lot of improvements in a lot of different areas. I've said it many times. He is not where I thought he'd be at this point in his career. But I also think it's fair to point out that he's played under in two different offenses, two different offensive coordinators. Not a lot of continuity at wide receiver with those guys always staying banged up. Although, as far as the playing under two different offenses, I do think Riley's is a little bit easier, on a quarterback, as far as having to learn what he's got to learn and stuff. He's got to make a lot of improvements. Hopefully he can build off that last drive we saw there against Kentucky in the Gator Bowl. Probably his best drive since he's been at Clemson. I guess you could point to that very first one he had against Georgia Tech, but that was against an extremely gassed defense and late in the game and garbage time. I think he's got to be better. First and foremost, as you pointed, he's got to be better with his decision making. He's got to be better reading defenses pre-snap, post-snap. He's got to be much better learning the football, but I don't know that he will be. I just don't know that he's strong enough to have the kind of impact in the running game that Garrett Riley likes for his quarterbacks to have. He just seems to pretty much always go down on first contact, can't run through tackles and stuff, which kind of makes it even more important for him to have success in the passing game. But there are a lot of things he's got to improve on, and we'll see whether he does that or not. I also, I think, a porous offensive line factors into that too. If I could handpick a quarterback currently in college to run Riley's offense, who you take? Oh, I don't know, man. I'll just say it probably wouldn't be Klubnik. He just, if you look at the guys that have played for Riley and the guys he's going after since he's, that have played for him in the past, the guys he's going after since he's been at Clemson, this Cade Klubnik just does not fit that mold. He likes the bigger, stronger, quicker, more athletic guys. And that's not saying Cade's not athletic. He is, but Riley wants a difference maker in the running game, and I just don't think Cade is that. No, I'd like to see and I know he's not there anymore, but I'd like to see a Michael Penix in a Garrett Riley offense. How long of a leash does Cade have before Trent Pierman gets shot? Probably a pretty long one. If I had to venture a guess, I mean, I don't think you're going to see him get yanked out because he's not playing well against Georgia. Now, if he goes out there and he starts making a bunch of boneheaded decisions that lead to turnovers and stuff, over the first few games, I could, maybe then. But I think he'll probably have a pretty long leash. Yes, Riley recruited Cade in high school. I don't know how hard, but I know he did recruit him while he was at TCU. Still don't think he's the best fit for Riley's offense. How is the helmet communication like the NFL uses going to work? Will it just be for conference opponents or the whole schedule? I think it's the whole schedule. They can talk to one player on the field, so your offensive coordinator can be in your quarterback's ear. And then I think you get one guy on the defense side of the ball, if I'm remembering right. But I do think I think there are some pros and cons. Probably more pros than cons, but especially if you've got a really good offensive coordinator that can see things as they're happening on the field, and he can talk to you in your ear between plays and tell you what he's seeing. I think that can, be very beneficial. If you got an OC that maybe doesn't see it quite as well as it's happening, and if you got an OC that's steady screaming in your ear between plays, maybe they're not so beneficial. But I like this new rule, man. I think it's gonna help a lot of quarterbacks out there. Hopefully, it'll help Cade this year. No worries, Carson, man. It's 7:00 every Monday night from here on out. There is, let's see. Let me look at it right now while I'm thinking about it, because there is 1 week I can tell you right now there ain't going to be no show. July 22nd, no show that night. But other than that, we're back on Mondays now after about a month on Wednesdays. And no worries, man. You can go back and catch it on YouTube or Facebook or wherever you catch me at there. Glad to be back on Mondays. Glad for those of you who followed me to Wednesday for the last few weeks. Very much appreciate that. Very much appreciate everybody that followed me back to Monday nights. Normal home, normal time slot here. We'll be right back at it next Monday. One day before we get Dabo, for the first time ahead of the camp or fall camp, shall I say. Let's see. Are we still the favorites from Jordan? I would lean towards Clemson with him. It's He's kind of got an October commitment date. We'll see if he waits that long or not. I think Clemson's going to start getting some better news on the recruiting trail for the end of this month. You got the cookout coming up. You already know Logan Anderson's coming. Dylan Alford's coming. We'll see if they get anybody else to come besides the guys currently committed. Usually that's not the big recruiting event it used to be, and you're in a dead period, for the whole month of July. It is going to be the last weekend in July, so it opens back up for that week ahead of the cookout. But it's only open for that week. Maybe they can get a couple other uncommitted guys here, but we know Dylan Alford's coming. We know Logan Anderson's coming. We'll see if they can get Jordan Young back here, but I would still call him the favorite. Two pair of shades still out there floating around. We'll see when they pop off. No idea when that's going to happen, but just want to say thanks to everybody tuned in. Thanks to everybody that stuck with me on Wednesdays this month. Thanks to everybody that came back on Monday, and check us out, Clemson Insider. See y'all next week.